Transformation does require being squeezed, really falling apart, but you also live fully. And so if you're only after a limited version of being human, then stay blissfully ignorant.
Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Hey guys, welcome back to Manders Mindset. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with a very special guest for a conversation I am really excited to have. And I am here with Debra Lukovich, and she has a PhD in depth psychology. She's a coach, author, and host of the Dose of Depth podcast. Her expertise is the study of the unconscious, and she helps people come into deeper relationship with themselves by learning the language of their unconscious. After navigating her own midlife unraveling and reconstruction, which paralleled an irrational desire to study depth psychology, she unleashed creatively, and now Debra is on a mission to grow a movement of self-reflecting humans. She empowers people with a framework for self-reflection focused on learning the language of their unconscious, which is how the soul reveals clues about our deepest desires. Dr. Debra describes herself as an accidentally funny, awkward, depth psychology nerd who is addicted to finding meaning in ordinary life events and overshares to encourage others to explore the deeper meaning of their lives. And I am in the middle of Debra's recent book, and I am absolutely loving it. It is called Your Soul is Talking. Are You Listening? 5 Steps to Uncovering Your Hidden Purpose. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into a little bit about relationships, sexuality, and desire, pleasure, and all of those things today. Hi, Debra. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here and talk about some of my favorite topics.
Me too. This is a topic I have not explored very much on Manders Mindset, so I'm so excited to get into it. I'm so excited.
Awesome.
So I typically start my podcast with the first question of, who is Debra at the core? That's an amazing bio of all your accomplishments and great personality traits of you, but who are you at the core?
I would say I am a misfit. I'm a misfit. Although I'm a Gemini, and my birth chart, if anybody is into birth chart, has an opposition. The poles that are opposite are Saturn and Pluto. So the Saturn part of me is like the adult, the responsible, the rule follower, that kind of person. But the opposite is Pluto, which is the rebel. So my whole life is like I'm a walking tennis match about which rules to break. And I am an activist at heart. And so in my 20s, I was quite vocal as an activist. And I am all about advocating for anybody marginalized, anybody who's a misfit. I don't care I don't care what it is. I don't care if you have ADHD or autism or you're a woman or you're a transgender person or whatever it is. If you don't fit in, I'm there for you.
That's beautiful. Have you always been someone who's been an advocate for those types of people?
Well, looking at it from a depth psychology lens now, which I'm obsessed with doing, one of my courses was looking at vocation through a depth psychology lens. And one way your unconscious speaks to you is memories. So all of your memories are stored in your body, but what explains which memories come up when? Right? So there's always a reason. So we were in partnership allowing our earliest memories of childhood to come up. And so mine were a combination of boom, these 3 came up. One was being about 3 or 4 and being in my parents' apartment before we moved into a house. And I don't know, I remember my dad sitting there reading the comics and that there were sirens outside and that I felt fear. And then the other pair of memories I had was being in elementary school and I was bullied mercilessly. Like I was held up against a chain link fence and my hair was pulled every day. And so there was sort of the memory. So there's fear, there's the memory of just being relentlessly bullied. And it's the quiet people who suffer, in silence. Other kids might lash out and, fight but introverts will go inward, right? And just suffer quietly. But the other memory that was really interesting to me and tied to my becoming an activist was there was a corner of the playground where there was this big tree and we used to play marbles around it. So I'm old enough to be like back we'd play marbles and we'd trade steelies and tiger eyes and those different kinds of marbles. And I was good at it. I was good at playing marbles. And it was the one place that I felt safe and not in danger. And so what did that have to do with vocation? It sort of made sense that, and during my midlife unraveling, there was a synchronicity that happened when I went to work for Playworks and I was their director, and that my elementary school was one of our clients. So circling back, Playworks is about transforming school culture through play and creating community on the playground. So it was like a way to see that those early childhood experiences and the fact that I wasn't only bullied, that I could carve out a safe space. So why did I feel safe there around the tree playing marbles is because there were rules, right? So those rules kept me safe. So anyway, it's, that's the meandering nature of the unconscious. So
That's so fascinating to me about how you said all memories are stored, but they come up for a certain reason at certain times.
Yeah.
That makes sense, but it's something I haven't often thought about.
Yeah. Well, the unconscious speaks to us in many ways, and it purposely tries to get around the mind because the mind, our thinking function, is defensive in nature. So even think about how we learn. And this is good for some things we learn, but not for other things we learn. Math, for example. First, you learn how to add, and then you learn how to subtract, and then you learn how to multiply. And you can't learn how to multiply unless you know how to add and subtract, right? So naturally, our brain is looking to affirm and confirm what it already knows. So that could be a good thing, except that when we're trying to expand our consciousness or when we are in a crisis, and everything that used to work isn't anymore, that's why we can get stuck in the familiar because our mind wants to protect us and really doesn't want us to unleash the unconscious contents. So memories randomly coming up, fantasy images, dreams, emotions are all things that confuse the mind. And so the way that we explore those images is through associations, metaphors, and symbolism, not a literal understanding. So, yeah, so it can feel really random until you understand the language of your unconscious. And they're like, oh, there's meaning here. What's happening to me? But I'm not going to be able to use a linear approach to figuring it out. And there might not even actually be words for it. You might not even be able to articulate what it means unless you draw it or unless you dance it or unless you process it in some other way. And so sometimes your insights come through the body or movement rather than through the mind. So some insights I gained, I would have never gotten through my Jungian therapy, which Jungian therapy is supposed to be more open to the unconscious, but we still just get stuck in this sort of mind and talking instead of, surrendering to the mystery of the unconscious.
Wow. Okay. Now, what would you suggest for a first step for somebody to step into the language of their unconscious?
Well, I would say to start being curious about your life and become curious and notice what you notice. So just be still for a couple of minutes, look around, and just notice what you notice. So even just a little bit of stillness and being alert to, hey, what's that tree saying to me? Because the external world mirrors something back to us. And so one of the ways that your unconscious speaks to you is through synchronicity. So you might have heard of that term. So synchronicity is different than a coincidence. Synchronicity has meaning. That's the difference. A coincidence is like, okay, well, that's not very interesting. Yeah, that is a coincidence. But a synchronicity is when your unconscious reaches out to the world and grabs onto something. It might be a billboard. It might be the fact, for me, I had 2 weeks on my walks. I would see like 12 white cars in a row drive by. Over and not just once is interesting enough, right? Over and over. And one day I was like, okay, let's really dig into this. And let's just see. Yep, 12 white cars. 5 minutes later, oh my God, there's more. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What is that? So then I went home and I'm like, I Googled, what's the spiritual meaning of white cars? And so a car is a symbol of your persona. So your personality, persona, the face we show the world. And sometimes we're changing it, right? And I'm still in a new phase of creating a new identity. And so it kind of made sense. What is white often can symbolize purity, newness, right? So that's something that you can become aware of. Now, people who are really stuck in the mind will just go, oh, that's silly. So you don't have to believe in magic or astrology or anything. You actually can look at this in a neuroscience way. So if you think about how much data our brain takes in, we're only aware of such a tiny little part of it, right? How could we would shut down? We would be overloaded if we were aware of all the data that comes in, all the stimulus, right? What determines what stimulus you pay attention to? Right? Like, what is that about? So again, if the mind just is seeking to affirm and confirm, and we want to expand, we sort of have to disrupt that and disrupt those patterns. And that way, and using metaphor and associations sort of takes us down a new path. And then if you're familiar with the notion of like neural grooves, right? So a really ingrained habit has a really deep neural groove. Well, in order to undo that, you have to replace it with something else. And so for your listeners, even really just looking at things, noticing them, and being curious about a deeper meaning and using symbolism and metaphor, you don't have to believe in anything. It's all about whether it clicks for you, may lead you to see something that you never saw before in your life. And it might be the thing that you need in order to move forward in your life. I would say dreams are the most popular way that I help my clients explore their unconscious. And on my website, I actually have a free resource that helps people it has some myth busters, because people tend to try to interpret dreams, and it's not about interpreting. It's really about finding meaning that's relevant to your life right now. So the people who show up in your dream is not about them. It's about your associations with them. So lots of people will say, oh, my exes are showing up in my dreams. Or I'm having sex with my ex in my dream. Oh my God, what is that about? Yuck, yuck. And it's not to be taken literally. But then we start talking about, what does that ex represent for you? Why were you with them? What lesson were you supposed to learn during your relationship with them? And it ends up leading to really powerful insights that, again, have nothing to do with that literal person. So it's all about metaphor and symbolism, which, generally speaking, we're not really taught that kind of intelligence,
I know. I like how you mentioned that it's not about the person, even the dream that you're having. Mm-hmm. Because I think, especially with a sex dream, so many people associate that to mean more than it means, or to be more about sex. And I think it was a podcast that I heard you say this on, but you said that sex dreams rarely have anything to do literally about sex.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on why or how?
Yeah. Yeah. So typically when sexual imagery shows up in a dream, it has to do with intimacy with parts of yourself. So why does the psyche call on sexuality? Well, let's say, and this happened to me, let's say you have a dream and your sister's in it and she's performing oral sex on you or you're performing oral sex on her. What kind of emotion comes up? It's pretty awful, right? So there oftentimes what that is saying is that there's a part of you that's trying to come to the surface, but you feel a lot of shame about it, that it's wrong. Right. So your psyche will often use sexuality because, we have a lot of shame associated with sex in our culture. So it's a handy thing to grab onto, but you might take the wrong meaning from it. Right. And so this is why exploring it is kind of a process. So at the time that was happening, there were parts of me that were trying to come to the surface that were decisions I was trying to make that seemed wrong. They weren't wrong. That's when my mind can come in handy and say, no, that's what you need to do. But because every memory is stored in your body, disrupting your patterns is really difficult. For example, women who need to set better boundaries, right? So if they're used to being disempowered, being empowered can feel morally wrong. Literally, like just saying no will leave them feeling like they're being irresponsible or they're being immoral. And this is when their head has to say, well, no, that's ridiculous. So you need to do that anyway and weather the discomfort of challenging that association, the immorality with setting your own boundary. And then if you do that, you'll feel liberated. So if you know any friends who are like, yes, I told him off. I finally told my boss off. There's this liberation, but there's also this like, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Oh my God, now I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me. So the liberation is the reward. The liberation says, yes, that was the right thing to do. So that's kind of a long answer to your question. But yeah, sexual images are, again, it's about your associations and symbolism, metaphor. What is that a metaphor for? What is going on in my life where I feel like, oh my God, that's disgusting that I'm doing that? Yeah. Because our emotion, remember, like most of our emotions and thoughts are below the surface of consciousness. You don't really know most of your thoughts. We have 60,000 every day. How many do you think you're actually conscious of? Maybe 100, right? And so research shows, science shows that 75% of our thoughts are negative and 95% are repetitive. So we have this repetition of negative, judgmental thoughts below the surface that constantly is sort of, countering even what you're consciously saying. No, I believe this. Well, below the surface, you might not actually believe that's true, which is why manifesting is really hard for a lot of people.
No, that makes so much sense. So would you say, now you mentioned to ask yourself in terms of a sex dream, what is going on in my life that disgusts me or you're ashamed of?
Yeah.
Would you say it may not even be related to something sexual that is happening?
It's probably not. It's probably not at all. Right. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's just that there's a part of you that shame is attached to it. And it might be it might be a part of you that was active in your childhood. And then for some reason, as you got older, your parents were like, no, you can't do that. That's not useful. You're not going to make a living doing that, or that's dumb, or like whatever. And it doesn't even have to be very dramatic. We take in these messages, right? And so you might have a version of yourself as a child that got squashed by teachers, and there's some shame attached to it. But now in your midlife unraveling, or when you're trying to expand, that desire is coming up. But there are these old messages that are shaming it from and not allowing it to come up. So usually those messages of sexuality and shame. Not all sexual dreams have shame. Some of them have, a lot of pleasure, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm having pleasure doing this. No, that doesn't seem right. Right. So that conflict doesn't have to do with sex. It really has to do with these parts of you that are having a little war with each other. And one is drowning the other one down because remember, your body is storing all these messages you've received about different ways to express yourself. So, yeah, I'm glad you asked that clarifying question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Wow. And I love how you mentioned about asking ourselves questions and starting the process of getting to the depth of it, getting more curious, figuring out who we are deep down.
Yeah,
and
it's fun.
Yeah, and asking those more meaningful questions to get to know ourselves.
Yeah, here's something people can ask. So emotions are another way our unconscious speaks to us. So when we have collective anxiety right now, so when we have anxiety, it's our unconscious is trying to get our attention. So one of the things, and I have a podcast episode, a couple of them, that uses meditation, a guided meditation with active imagination for people who are suffering from negative emotions like anxiety. So during that meditation, we will first pinpoint where is it in the body. So anxiety for some is here in the heart chakra. Anxiety for others is like the brain. I can't figure it out. I feel so much fear about what is the future and that sort of thing. Other people may have like this pressure in their lower right sacral area, and there's different meaning to the right versus the left side. So once we can get in tune with the part of our body and really focus on that part of our body, then we ask our unconscious to bring an image, like a dream image. And so the image might be an orb, a pink orb. The image might be a memory. The image might be a cartoon character. It might be a brick. It might be whatever. And then we'll ask our imagination if we can move the image out of the body, or it will move out of the body. And so Eckhart Tolle, I don't know if you're familiar with Eckhart Tolle, he talks about how we are not our thoughts. We are not our emotions. We have them. Right. So we get confused that we think the things we think are true. Right. And so this is why in active imagination, we ask the image to move over here so we can look at it and we can have a dialogue with it. And we can say, oh, is that really anxiety? And what does anxiety even mean for me? And anxiety, why are you here? Like, what do you want from me? And your imagination will talk back. And it will give you a really clear message if you really want it. We also can't be demanding of our images, but we relate to the image. And then anxiety for me had to do with my new unleashed inner child that I found. Like I literally was like, started playing beach volleyball at 48. I was doing cartwheels. I was skipping down the sidewalk. I was dating younger men. I was doing all this stuff. And it was challenging my sense of hyper responsibility, because I also was a mom of teenage kids and all of this stuff. So I had these two opposing energies. And one, I showed up as the lawyer. And I thought that character was being judgmental of me. But that's a judge, right? A lawyer's not a judge. A lawyer makes its case. So I would do active imagination, and the lawyer's like, just hear me out. Just hear me out here. I am used to you being hyper responsible. And now you've got this child energy, and I'm afraid you're going to go too far. But you make your choice. Just hear me out. And every time I would have this conversation with my inner lawyer, my anxiety, I would make my choice. He'd go away. He was totally happy after I listened to him. And then he might show up like 6 months later because something else was going on that felt like it was in opposition. And so I had to challenge my inner lawyer who had always been there to protect me, but now I was wanting to unleash. So I needed to ask him to take a little break and trust me and overcompensate. Sometimes we overcompensate, and then we find our way back to like this healthier balance. So yeah, so emotions. So again, asking questions. I love it. You're picking up on like, what's going on here? Like, what are you trying to say to me?
Yeah. I've heard that before about how we're not our thoughts or emotions. I did not realize that's not who was said that. But that's so interesting to me about the two opposing energies, because I think a lot of people experience that in different areas, whether it's sexuality and pleasure, whether it's having multiple interests in some other area of their lives. And it can often be opposing interests. Even career-related things is what's also coming to my head. For example, I'm a breathwork facilitator and I'm also a medical marijuana patient. And I've had people say things to me even about that by, don't you believe in the power of the breath and marijuana? It's not something that's good for the breath, and those opposing energies. And it is a little conflicting, but I'm someone who believes in the benefits of both. But I think a lot of people can deal with those conflicting situations and life experiences where two different things are opposing each other. How did you, what helped you navigate that? Anything?
Well, I mean, the root of all growth is inner opposition. So there's a concept in depth psychology, Carl Jung, who is one of the founders of depth psychology, that he called the transcendent third. So there's a lot of opposition playing out in our culture right now, right? Like some wild ass, like rigidity, extremism versus like expanding consciousness. So what's happening at a collective level is the need to hold the tension between these two. So a third option unleashes out of the collective unconscious. So that regression by some, the extremism, the intolerance, is also pushing increased consciousness raising for other people like us who are able to self-reflect where other people cannot. And so that's where my mission comes from, growing a movement of self-reflecting humans, because it's not helpful to judge, but we also are triggered, right? So those people also serve the role of us exploring the root of our emotional reaction to them. And as we can find the deeper meaning and find our own parental wounds and complexes, then we can feel neutral toward them. Of course, there's also violence against some people as well. That's another thing. But we can feel neutral, and our deeper self-reflection allows us then to show up in the world in a different way. And we are changing the world by doing that. Those movements are quieter, right? I just had a couple people on my podcast. One was about authentic relating, a movement around the world. And another was an international organization that trains people to work with men and women to heal their gender wounds. And so beautiful experiences of being able to hold the wounds that patriarchy has inflicted not only on women, but on men. And so that we can hold that. There's a perfect example of where patriarchy is all about opposition, right? You have to choose. So if I'm wounded by patriarchy says, well, you have to make the other person the other. You can't feel sympathy for men. Well, that's ridiculous. They're harmed by the system too. And so once we can go, oh, I honor my patriarchal wound, but I can also honor the sinister way that patriarchy has harmed men, are the worst at emasculating other men, right? We don't have to choose. So what does that do? That brings us closer together, which patriarchy doesn't like. Patriarchy doesn't like reconciliation between different groups. So the more that we can self-reflect and do that work, it's quieter work, right? But that's grassroots work. And so everybody's playing their role. So this happens inside us too, the inner opposition between sexuality and spirituality. It's always between like the masculine and the feminine. Masculine not meaning man or woman, but meaning masculine, the intellect, the 2 + 2 = 4, linear thinking. The feminine is where creativity comes from. Creation doesn't come from the masculine, the mind. We receive it from creative intelligence. And then the masculine comes in to shape it, write it, to bring form to it. So it's a partnership. And so we have a lot of opposition inside us. And it feels like, oh, I want to do this, but I shouldn't, or I can't. So the key then for your listeners is to, okay, what do I want to do? All right, let's explore what I want to do. All right, what's keeping me from doing that? Oh, what is the root of that pattern, that response, that automatic response I have that I can't do that? Oh, because that's selfish? Oh, what does selfish mean? You mean if I feel pleasure, that's selfish? Oh, I'm going to challenge that. That doesn't even make sense to me. So you hold the opposing views and you play with them. And then eventually they can reconcile into a new version that includes both of them, right? So in the gender wound, we have a man who's willing to listen to women speak about the impact of sexism and violence on their lives. And then women are able to listen to men speak about how other men belittle them if they're not, quote, masculine enough. And then we can feel empathy for together as a community. And that's amazing. But that happens by sitting together and playing with both of what feels opposing, but it's really not.
I love how you said what feels opposing, but is really not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
And,
yes.
and making it less rigid. Why can't it all,
Right.
even when you mentioned the masculine and the feminine, I've struggled a lot with both of these energies and being a little more masculine in my life because I'm so organized in structure and about the planning and the, this is how the system's going to work and this is what we got to do. I was someone who at one point in my life had a 3-hour morning routine that I thought relaxed me. Lo and behold, it did not relax me.
It was too rigid.
Yeah. But I love how you mentioned like there can be a third option. It doesn't have to be black and white. You know,
Right.
so many things are like, it's this or it's this. And it's why
That's kind of like a disease. Once you realize that everything is in the gray, you start to you start to notice how limiting everybody's thinking is. And everything is presented as an either or, as opposed to and. There's this and there's this. And how do they relate? And how can we look at things that we don't think relate in a way that there's an innovative new perspective, a new lens through which to see things? Yeah.
that's true. And I think a lot more things than so many of us realize relate to one another. Different
Yeah.
things.
Well, right. So that's the feminine consciousness. Feminine consciousness is about connectedness and connecting dots. And there is a very low intelligence level among most people to find connections that aren't pointed out to them because we've grown really rigid in our thinking. So in our society, you really do have to be intentional about inviting the unconscious to the table, inviting the feminine to the table. And the feminine is about being receptive, which is not passive. When you receive, you choose to receive. If you're not choosing, you're being forced. That's not what the feminine is. The feminine is, the chalice is a symbol of the feminine. And when we empty the chalice, then we can receive. And so in order to receive, then we kind of drop down into a lower level of consciousness and stillness. So the saying, whether you're religious or not, you've probably heard the saying, be still and know I am, or be still and know I am God. You don't even have to believe in a particular God, but it's be still so that you can hear the whispers of your own unconscious or yourself, capital S, which is like this organizing principle that makes you up, that is the bridge to the cosmos, is the bridge to the collective unconscious. So when the better relationship you have with the self and you trust, it then is your connection to this archetypal level. And then when you're there, you can be swept up in amazing experiences where you realize you're not totally in control. So a lot of artists, musicians, poets, many of them realize that they're surrendering to some mysterious force that writes with them. They invite other creative people aren't aware that this is what's happening. So the best, most powerful creative people produce things that they don't really take credit for. They'll even say like, I don't even know how that happened. It just happened. I got swept up and it just happened. So you're partnering with creative intelligence, inviting, receiving it to create something you can't do alone. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced it, but I've written, and one night I'll have written, and then, or a blog post. Like one Sunday, I had to write a blog post, a review for someone's book that I was so nervous. I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. And I plopped my butt down for 8 hours and I wrote it. And then when I read it, I was like, holy crap, I wrote that? That's good. Like, I don't know how I wrote that. But it was so important that I kind of surrendered myself and I said, I'm going to relax into this. And so the masculine in you would pressure you to get that done, right? The feminine you would say, okay, no expectations. I'm going to sit down and sort of surrender, give in, and really amazing, like magical, miracle things happen when you can surrender to your higher, your higher wisdom.
So I like how you said magical things can happen when you surrender to your higher wisdom. What would you say surrender means to you?
Surrender means, this would be a good time to bring in something sexual oriented. During a time of my midlife unraveling and reconstruction, there was a fantasy that was just torturing me. So spontaneous fantasy images, we don't make them. Like we could write a script for something, right? But that's not a fantasy. Fantasies just come. And sometimes there's shame when we have fantasies, right? Because we didn't choose to receive that image and then we judge ourselves. That's time to explore the meaning of that image then. So this fantasy was a submission fantasy. So it was in my bedroom. It was a particular man, the man I was swept up with, that I wasn't actually with at the time. And he's standing there naked and I'm on my knees and it wouldn't leave me alone. Like in the middle of the day at work, I would be in a meeting and I would get aroused. And I'm like, oh my gosh, go away. Go away. Oh my, I am not choosing this. It was terrible. It was literally torturing me. So I decided to draw it. And so I Googled, how do you draw a naked man standing with an erect penis? If I can say that. How do you draw?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. How do you draw a naked woman kneeling in front of the erect penis? And Google showed me how to do it. And so I drew that and I found myself writing the word receptive at the top. So, okay.
Why did you decide to draw it? If you don't mind me interrupting you.
Because I was studying depth psychology and I just knew that because it wouldn't go away, it was trying to tell me something, like a reoccurring dream. If you're getting a reoccurring dream, it's because you're not learning the lesson. You're not decoding the message. So, yeah. So I drew it and I wrote the word receptive in the top corner. And then I was like, oh, this is about submitting to this part of myself that I'm not used to trusting. It wasn't about sex, although sometimes you need to act out those things too. So sometimes there is a literal component, and I was coming into relationship with my body and sexuality again too. And I was also, feeling very much like, because of what was happening with my marriage falling apart and there was alcoholism involved, I felt like I had to be the one to take care, keep everything together. So there was also sort of this like, when do I get to fall apart? When do I have to not be in charge? So there can also be that aspect of your submission, sort of your submission fantasy. So I drew it. And then not long after that, in meditation, I felt a burden. I was meditating, I had a candle lit, and I felt something being lifted from my shoulders. Because I'm a very I have a one-sided masculine and very much like, I will take care of myself. But I thought I had to figure out my own life. And so in this moment of meditation, I felt this thing lifted off my shoulders. And it was this feeling of liberation that I wasn't alone. And that experience surrendering to myself made me aroused, and I had to have an orgasm. It brought pleasure. So I consider that, I laughed at myself because I'm like, oh my gosh, did God just give me an orgasm? It was I had an image of light coming in and out of my head as I'm feeling aroused. And so all of this was a time that I was learning how to surrender to this deeper part of me. And it was terrifying. But when I did it, I was rewarded with pleasure. So I thought, okay, I'm going to keep being vulnerable and awkward because that's feeling pretty good to get rewarded that way. So that sort of goes back to your answering your question about, what does it feel like? How do you do that? And it was an inner shift that then led to changes in my life, changes in how I made decisions, right? Changes in being able to take risks that challenged my sense of shame and responsibility. Being my soul saying I had to leave a 6-figure job without a new job, doing things like that goes so against the grain of convention and your own sense of identity, but that are needed. Everything needed to be dismantled. Everything I thought was true was no longer true. So then where was I going to go? Can't go to my mind. I had to crack open, right? And so, so I just threw in a couple different things in there, how fantasy images, the sexuality part of it, and then also just sort of this experience of surrender.
Yeah. So why do you think we often confuse feelings of arousal with a desire for sexual intimacy?
Well, Christianity. I mean, there was a time, religions that value the masculine and sort of split off the feminine. So there was a time when sort of union between the masculine and the feminine in older religions, it was sort of revered. And so sexuality was revered. I mean, there wasn't always a bad association with pleasure and sexuality. We have a really difficult relationship with pleasure now. Pleasure is really important. Pleasure is it's evolutionary, right? So what happened is when, Christian doctrine might not have ended up the way it did if it didn't crash with patriarchy, right? So we don't know. There were feminists at the very beginning of the development of Christian doctrine. And so there was a lot of argument about how to write that experience of Jesus and Christ and all of that. There's no. So, the versions of it now are very reduced and rigid, as you can see. It doesn't resonate for a lot of people. So that's part of the reason. So we just have this collective difficulty with pleasure. So when sort of patriarchy was infused with Christian doctrine, what it did is it elevated the masculine as more important, right? And turned it into a father. And who is the mother of God? Mary. I mean, people forget about right? She took over for the old goddess, but they relegated her. And then what happened is anything having to do with the feminine was split off. And so no longer do we have a feminine and masculine, which we do, every one of us does, but the feminine was projected onto literal women, the gender, nature, mother nature, and how we've exploited nature and controlled. And so it's about controlling sexuality. And so all of that's trying to change and reconcile, right? This is the age of reconciling the masculine and the feminine and transcending the idea of gender. So, now I forget your original question. Oh, pleasure. So, okay. So people don't really have a framework for how to come into relationship with themselves as sexual beings. So you think about arousal. Yes, can you put yourself in a situation where you can induce a state of arousal? Yeah. But for the most part, it just comes when it wants, right? We don't really control who attracts us. It's so mysterious. right? So for me, attraction is creative intelligence showing up and asking for something from us. And arousal and attraction is mostly misunderstood. So I remember the first time this happened to me where I was like, oh, whoa, what is happening here? And I was having a beer with a man colleague who I respected so much. And we were both kind of activists. And so we'd have these conversations about social justice and he was a leader and I was a leader. And it was so exciting I mean, I'm a nerd that way. And so during our conversation, suddenly I grew aroused. And in my head, I'm going, why am I aroused right now? Am I attracted to him? No. First of all, he's married. I know his wife. Like, so you have all these thoughts like, oh, no, I shouldn't feel this way. You can't stop it. Right. And so I realized, and then I asked myself, I imagined kissing him. And I was like, no, I'm not attracted. It's not sexual. And so I realized that what's arousing for me is certain ideas and conversations that have to do with activism, that have to do with social justice. So I get aroused by talking about social justice. I mean, it sounds really weird, but what is that? He and I in our conversation, that sexuality, that sexual energy was producing ideas, right? So creativity is arousing. There is always a what does sexuality lead to? Babies, of course, but all kinds of other sorts of creative expression. And so it's something that I love writing and talking about and working with my clients is how to see our relationships, how different people mirror things back to us. And when we're attracted to someone, what's happening is that if you ask yourself, why am I attracted to them? What is it about them? What sorts of associations do I have with them? Sometimes it's your unconscious saying, I want you to be more like that. Like that's arousing as you imagine you like that. They're a mirror for you and that excites you. But most people wouldn't think to look at it that way, right? They might feel shame that they feel, attraction for, they're married and they feel attraction for their best friend's husband or wife. And so because of that misunderstanding, there's an assumption that means you want to have sex with them. And so once you begin to explore the symbolic meaning of sexuality and attraction, you can feel better because it's not what you think it is. And like when your friend's husband shows up in your dream, you don't really want to have sex with your friend's husband. It is a symbol for something that's trying to communicate with you that he's mirroring back to you. So, I could talk about that all day.
Okay, so it's a symbol that they're mirroring back to you.
Yeah, so they represent something your unconscious is grabbing on to them, something about them or something about the interaction that you're having that then is arousing, is stimulating. And because it's touching you deep inside, why wouldn't that be arousing, right?
That makes sense.
Finding a sense of purpose, coming into deeper relationship with yourself, which is the bridge to the divine. Wouldn't that be pleasurable? Why wouldn't it be?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I want to transition a tad, but I'd love if you could touch upon how our subconscious mind influences who we're attracted to and why.
It's so mysterious. Yeah. So between you and I, just you and I, there's 4 conversations happening. There's your mind, your awareness is speaking to my mind. And I'm like, okay, I'm looking at you. I see your body language. I think I heard what you said. This is what I think is going on. I'm speaking back. Your mind is also my unconscious is absorbing different things. Your unconscious is picking up totally different things about me. And where the most fun is happening is between our unconscious. Our unconscious is literally on a playground right now. So anyone you're with, this is what's going on. And so based on your uniqueness, your wounds, your mother complex, your father complex, your purpose, your deeper sense of purpose, other people are going to mirror different things back to you. Some people are going to just be you're going to be emotionally neutral with. But the ones that aren't, whether it's a negative or a positive, that's time to explore. And that's when you can be like, oh, like they're making me anxious, or that thing that they do triggers me. Why doesn't it trigger that person? Why is it me? And so what is it? What did they represent that is a wound that you need to explore? Because, if you have processed that, then you won't be triggered by it, right? Now, people that you really admire, why do you really admire certain people? Because you want to be like them. But the most interesting projections, so this is projection, is when there's somebody that you admire and also they make you cringe at the same time. So during part of my midlife unraveling, I was obsessed with Millionaire Matchmaker and Tabitha Salon Takeover. And they're both reality shows with very strong, opinionated women. One is a Jewish woman, like a third generation matchmaker who worked with millionaires. And Tabitha was like a skinny white chick who would go in and tear down a salon and build them up. And so I admired them because they were powerful women, but they made me cringe because they were so mean. I'm like, how can you do that to people? And now looking back, what was going on there is that I needed to be more like them, but I perceived what they were doing to be mean and wrong. Objectively speaking, was it? No, I mean, they did their job well. Like they are, it was successful and people needed what they had to offer, right? But that level of like directness was uncomfortable for me, even where I was in my marriage. So I had over adapted to a situation for a long time to the point where I just sort of compromised my inner strength over time. And so these two shows, that's what they were mirroring to me, was that, I admired them, but what I really needed to work on was finding my voice, right? And being able to respond to the moment, respond to my husband at the time. So that's part of what we learn through other people. So I have a framework I call 3 Ps. And the first P is purpose. So every interaction has a hidden unconscious purpose. And the purpose is always growth. So even your terrible breakups, that's the best material to explore. Because if you don't learn the lesson, we have friends like this, right? They keep repeating the same thing, right? Not on purpose, but they keep finding themselves in the same situation because they haven't learned the lesson, right? So there's purpose, projection we just talked about, and then permanence. So when it comes to romantic relationships, clinging to the need for something to last will sabotage growth. So when you're in a relationship, often if you're afraid of being honest because you're not honest because you're afraid of how they'll respond, then you're actually making it less likely for your relationship to last. So letting go, surrendering to just, this is about growth. And it would be lovely if we lasted forever, but if we don't, I'll be okay. Then you'll really grow in that relationship. So I work with a lot of clients in relationship couples. And so, yeah, so I mean, there's so much more, but every relationship, not just romantic, there is some kind of exchange of energy going on that's meant to prop growth.
No, I completely agree. There's an exchange of energy for every type of relationship. And I love how you mentioned the focus is always growth. And it made me think about how, when you talked about permanence, how so many people, and I think it ties back to society and even maybe religion, that you're meant to find this one perfect person that's going to be your soulmate forever and ever, and you're going to spend 50 plus years together. But it reminds me of that blog post that you posted about, what about finding the one for now?
Yeah.
Like maybe you guys are meant to help each other grow for a season, and this is what's meant to happen. You're meant to have certain experiences, but why does it have to be a forever thing? That doesn't mean there was not growth that happened to both of you in both of your lives, and even other people's lives that were affected by this relationship that the two of you had. But it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be forever, you know?
No, just think about it. It's a silly idea. I mean, let's just be honest about it. This is such a controlling idea and limiting idea. And so people end up not really fully living and not fully developing, or one person in a couple ends up compromising their self, their inner core. And, if you do believe in the divine, is always challenging people to bust out of convention. The divine is always about growth, spiritual growth. And so whatever silly human ideas are about it is besides the point. So, and it also causes a lot of pain and suffering, right? So people, right? So it's interesting how there's a whole such controlling ideas. But I think, your generation in particular, but millennials and Gen Z are really challenging those ideas. And, I have two Gen Z kids, 23 and 25, and they're, maybe partially because they have a depth psychologist as a mom, but they're not clinging to any ideas. They're just living, and they're growing and they're exploring. So, yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, the article, I'm glad you liked that. What if it's not about finding the one, it's more about finding the one for now. And then, for a lot of my clients who have been through a divorce, some hop into another relationship, and then we're talking about, often if you haven't done the work and you go into another relationship, these red flags will come up, and sometimes you'll interpret them wrong. And women will often see red flags and they'll just not trust themselves, so they don't say anything. So that's their lesson. Their lesson is to no, I need to advocate for myself and be honest about how I'm feeling. And then every single time, honesty will strengthen the relationship. So it is possible that maybe there is a really long-term relationship, but, the quality of it will depend upon the honesty, because people don't grow together. They don't keep the same interests. They don't. Yeah. And for other people, sometimes this relationship is preparing you for the next level, a different level of relationship. Right. And maybe that's preparing you for a higher level of relationship. Not to be judgmental of people, but sometimes you're mismatched. You cannot cause another person to be who you want them to be. Right. So it's up to you. Do you stay? And is that okay? And you accept it? That's fine. But then you can't be mad at them for not meeting your expectations. Or you can say, I'm not getting what I need. And so, what are we going to do about it? Or I need to move on. I love you, but I need a different kind of relationship with you, because I have to follow whatever this thing is inside of me. And maybe it's going to be no relationship. Maybe my relationship is going to be with purpose. So why do we even need a relationship? Sometimes the sexual energy for me the last 2 years has been all about this creative stuff. Nobody's showing up in my life. And part of me is come on, it's been 2.5 years and I haven't even had a date. But it never works out. Every time I go on Hinge, it just doesn't work out. So I feel like my unconscious is keeping me focused on this creativity. And then at some point, somebody will show up and I don't know what the purpose of that relationship will be.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's so true for even outside of relationships. I think we're slowly working away from that mindset, but even in terms of career, you go to college at 18, you get this job, and so many people are in their career for 20, 30, 40 years and they hate it, but they can't do anything else at this point because this is this is what they're doing. And this, they get in this stuck, permanent mindset of that this is just all that I've got. Do you have any suggestions for people to take to start to realize like nothing is permanent, like everything in life,
Ooh,
everything in life is fluid.
I like what you just said. Yeah, my new program actually is for people who are like, they followed the rules, they're outwardly successful, but something is missing. And they're sort of trapped in the systems that got them where they are, and their families, and especially for men who maybe, are boomer age, where they really do identify with being a provider. How do they come clean and say, I don't want to do this anymore? How do you, and your family is used to that lifestyle, and that can be really difficult. And then I have another client who's 40, and he had such rigid ideas of what it meant to be a successful, not only professional, but husband and father. And those ideas are not ours. They're other people's ideas. But here's what's scary. That 40-year-old would rather like live in a prairie. He doesn't even want to be part of any of this crap anymore. But he has a wife and 2 children who are like middle school and high school. And so what does he do in the meantime? Because eventually your soul will sabotage you. That's why certain people, like when they stay at jobs that they don't like, they'll end up either getting really sick or they'll get fired. That's the universe kicking your butt, saying, I mean, come on, you keep fighting this, you keep fighting this. But
That happened to me.
yeah, right. So the anxiety, what is the anxiety? It's because what you're searching for, you can't see, and it might not even exist. And so there's fear that you can't, this is the difference between the masculine and the feminine. So as you and I have well-developed masculines and we're goal-oriented, we've always known what the goal is. But then there's a part of life where I don't know what the goal is. I don't know what makes me happy. I might know what emotional state I want to experience, but I don't know how to find that. And so because we don't know, and we don't know how to plan it out, there's the anxiety. So what is the remedy for that is exploring your unconscious. And that's what my people are doing with me, is that I become part of this practice for them to get on this path where I teach them how to get relief from the negative emotion, the anxiety, and listen to the clues that anxiety is trying to give them about little steps to take so they don't have to figure it out. A great metaphor is the headlight. A car headlight is designed to specifically see 200 yards. Why 200 yards? Because some scientists figured out that's all you need to see in order to be able to handle what comes next. So if you're going around a curve, as long as you can see 200 yards, right? It's a moving 200 yards. That's it. So you don't have to know everything. In fact, if you know everything, that's your mind controlling. That's not the creative unconscious at work. And so getting used to just taking the steps that you know to take today. And in the meantime, your life might be the same, but you're like, okay, oh, that email, that seems like a synchronicity. Maybe I should check that out. And instead, noticing things that you never noticed before that are little breadcrumbs. So I just call them little breadcrumbs. Like, oh, why did I get swept up and write my soul book in 90 days? I wrote and published that, and I don't know how I did it. And it just kind of ended up being, oh, this is my credibility for my business. It also has evergreen content, as they say. So I can always, if you're reading, it's just full. Like there's a million questions, there's stories, there's all of that. So it's like a unlimited source of, I can pull it into a blog post and write a story about it or whatever. So I just did those things that were in front of me and define and to follow passion and desire. If you get to the place that your soul is like, you better get out of here. And I left a 6-figure job. I tried not to. I ended up staying and had a long transition. And eventually I felt like I was going to explode. And I walked away, and I had to go through a phase of really challenging my sense of responsibility. And I got through it. So also grounding yourself in rituals and practices that help you feel more grounded in a chaotic space. I mean, there's just so much. So that's why people hire me, because then we meet all the time for like a year or 2 years, and then they're able to go through this metamorphosis. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, they'll say something, and I'll say, "What did you just say? Do you realize how you've changed? 6 months ago, you would have never said that, never done that." And they're like, "What? What? That's who I am." I mean, it's amazing how it works, because I could like see their whole journey, and you sometimes don't notice. And then one day you're just like, you notice, wow, I'm not like that anymore. It's beautiful.
I love that. That's amazing. I'd love if you could elaborate whatever you want to share and whatever you're comfortable with about leaving that six-figure job and that transition for you.
Well, it was so during times of transition, Hermes, the Greek god known as guide of souls, who shows up as a trickster, is present. And so remember when I told you about my early childhood memories. And then part of my falling apart was not only my marriage, but a business, and my son was suffering, and I was like down on my knees. And then I was working on my own. I knew I was going to get divorced. And I'm like, being an entrepreneur, is not very financially stable, right, at the time. And I was exhausted, and I was going to be getting divorced. And my husband was the corporate guy, right? So he earned a lot more money than I did. I thought, okay, I'm either going to do this, or I'm going to look for a job at the same time. And whichever way it goes, that's the way I'm going. So that option didn't really pan out. And I looked, and I had never looked for a job on LinkedIn, and boom, there was this job for Playworks, that organization I was telling you about. And I was like, okay, I'm going to call them up. I'm going to go after it. They're either going to like me or they're going to hate me. I don't care. So no expectations. I had that job in 3 weeks. So 3 weeks later, I had this job. Then I'm like, Playworks. And what happened is that my inner child that I told you had been unleashed, I was playing every day. And then one of our clients is my elementary school. So to go back to the school where I was bullied, where there was a Playworks community, I was like, oh, and I was studying depth psychology. I'm like, what is the meaning of all of this? Like, what is going on? And so I kind of knew I would be there for 2 years. I don't know how, I just knew it. So just like clockwork, 18 months later, it was so weird. The national office started having problems with me after saying I was their best hire and exceeded all expectations. I felt like I was coming into my own, and they just hated me. And I was like, oh. And so it got so ridiculous that I just had to go part-time and start and work on my dissertation, but also start planning for what am I going to do with the step psychology stuff. And I didn't know. I was panicking. And finally, I had to eventually, they were like, well, when are you leaving? Because I kept dragging out my transition. And you can't keep doing that. I led like 24 people. So I left, and I didn't have a job. I had some savings. I owned a house. I had a high schooler and a daughter in college. And I tried to get my old business going again. That didn't work. I just panicked. And then I started applying for the same kind of freaking job. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. Why didn't I just stay there? I left there, and now I'm applying for the same job. So here's Hermes showed up. Hermes made me leave because I couldn't stand anymore. I thought I was going to die. And then I applied for a job that was kind of like that job. And the board president said to me, "You're really enthusiastic." And I was thinking, yeah, he must love that about me. And he said, our old director and our staff is about the opposite of enthusiastic. I don't match. Can you imagine not being hired? So that was Hermes saying, girlfriend, you are not going back ever. You have to go forward. And so I ended up doing all kinds of odd manual labor jobs and barely making enough money. And so it was putting me in a situation where I had to dismantle all my old beliefs about what is success, right? What is responsibility? And yeah, I did it. And that was really hard. And then I went through a period of 4 years of instability, uncertainty. But you know what? I had money from that house I sold. And then I felt guilty about spending that. So I had to deal with all these inner judgment things. And now I'm where I am now, where, I have a new business, but it was really a lot of suffering. So transformation does require being squeezed, really falling apart, but you also live fully. And so if you're only after a limited version of being human, then stay blissfully ignorant. But if you want to live fully and the depths that you'll experience and the heights of ecstasy and the depths of meaning, I only live once, then it is it's an Indiana Jones. Look at Indiana Jones. Why does he always go on those dangerous journeys? He has to do it. He's got purpose. And Indiana Jones movies are a great metaphor for what it's like to go through a depth psychology approach, because it's full of symbolism, right? And danger and decoding messages. So I often say working with me is like an Indiana Jones adventure.
That's so cool. Okay. I want to transition a little bit. Now that you mentioned a movie, it did make me think of, in that blog post, you referenced a Netflix film. What was it called? Good on Paper, I believe. In terms of the woman who, there was a guy she thought was okay, she thought was nice, but she wasn't attracted to him. She wasn't interested in him sexually, but her best friend was basically told her she was being too judgmental.
How many women say that? You're like, I'm not into him. And then your girlfriends are like, oh, but he's such a good guy. Oh,
he's so nice. And he's this and he's. Oh my God, that's my life summed up.
Do you know what you're telling me? You're telling me to settle. You're just telling me to suck it up and not want more.
And they mentioned early on, and there's something about how it happens. It happens often how us women, we won't be interested in a man, and he'll keep pursuing us, and he'll be very persistent. And then I think a lot of other women get in our heads and say, oh, he must really love you. It because he's trying so hard. You should give him a chance. At least I've had this said to me a lot. And even in the movie, they reference, you hear a lot of times, older women, oh, they said grandma say, I didn't like grandpa, but he was so persistent. And now we're together. We've been married 50 years,
Isn't it that sounds so yucky, doesn't it? I mean, that happened to me. My former husband, I was married for 24 years. And this is the other thing about the hidden agenda, the hidden unconscious reason why you're with somebody or you stay with them is that, I needed that relationship. But when I look back, really my unconscious was looking for stability. I had really chaotic experiences with sexuality and with relationship. And literally 2 weeks before I met my now former husband, I decided I hated men. I was like, I'm done. I'm just done with men. And then he shows up and he did pursue me. And, in a way, it kind of is now it was interesting because after 3 months of him pursuing me, there was this moment where I said, he's a good man. That's not passionate desire, love. I thought I was all of that. I thought it was, but I remembered that moment and I knew he would respect me. And I really think the unconscious, the other reason besides loving him, I thought I loved him, was safety. Right. And then when I didn't need safety anymore, so I projected something onto him. He projected something onto me. And in the end, we, couldn't stay married anymore, but we're still a family with our kids. So, yeah, I think, it's yuck. now I hear that, it's even cringier than I thought about it before, because you're being worn down. To be chased is like, I don't know. It reminds me of these weird situations would, during a certain phase, happen to me in the bars that I would hang out and study and have a glass of wine. And it was to test my ability to develop boundaries where, yes, I'm in a bar. So, yeah, I get it. Somebody's going to say hi and I'll say hi. But if I'm working on my laptop, you think they get the hint that, no, I'm not into having a long conversation. But these situations would keep happening where they would just keep bothering me, where they would push me enough where I'd say, I really don't want to have a conversation with you. And then I would feel bad. Right. So that's what's happening in those situations where your girlfriends are like my sister actually said I was being mean. She said, "You're so mean to John." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Because he was chasing me and I was like, "I'm just having fun." And so other women will actually say you're not being polite. Right. Now, women don't do that to men. When men make it clear, like we're like, they're not interested, we don't go invade their space and consider that a challenge. I mean, maybe there's some, right? But we're sort of trained, indoctrinated to be polite when other men are invading our space. And yet we wouldn't think to do that because we can tell somebody's not interested in us. It's disgusting, actually. There was a time when I was just really curious about why do men, not all men, there's so many quality men now, right? Great men, feminist men, but why do certain men feel entitled to your response? Feel entitled. It's a kind of privilege, entitlement, and it's gross. And so I've had to learn how to be like, no. Now what I used to think would be being bitchy, I'm like, no. So yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that.
It's true. It is yucky. But
Yep. Mm-hmm.
why do you think men feel like they have that right? Because even like you said, majority of women aren't doing that. Even like thinking about different friends of mine, even through years and years, like even when they felt like a guy wasn't interested, there's never been a big chase. Even like, oh, maybe she sends a double text, but like
Yeah.
you don't have the chase the way you have. That's so
No, because they've been indoctrinated to have a conquest. It's about conquest and competition. That's the patriarchal way. I don't think men necessarily want to be that way. And it's not all of them, but they're trapped in that, right? So men indoctrinate men to act that way. And so when men don't want to be dicks, they get pressure from other men to be dicks. And then women pressure other women to allow and accept that behavior. And they think it's a compliment, and it's not a compliment. It's really not. Just be straight. Like, I really like you. And you don't seem like you're into me. Can I check back in 2 months? Okay, sure. Right.
I like that. Okay.
You have to be
I've
mean
never
back. But
no, but I like that. That straight up honesty. I like you, but you don't seem that interested. Can I reach out to you in 2 months?
yeah,
Okay. And it doesn't give off the creepy vibes, but you're saying something, but you're being upfront, but you're not being a weirdo.
right. Yeah, exactly. So there you go, men. I love men, by the way. I love men. I have a special place in my heart for men. Anybody who wants to bust out of patriarchy and really have the courage to be a man and not have to follow these silly rules about other people deciding what's to be a man, I want to work with you. Like, I want to help you bust out of that emasculating framework.
Okay. Do you only work with men?
No, but I love working with men.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does your coaching style look like with the work you do with your clients?
It is playful. We find a sense of humor. It's also, I hold space for vulnerability, vulnerable sharing. No topic is taboo. So men actually do appreciate that I'll talk about anything. I love talking about sexuality and the deeper meaning of sexuality. We try to stay out of the head as much as possible. So to invite the unconscious to the table through exploring dream images, active imagination, even emotions. We debrief conflicts. Conflicts are great sources of insights and wisdom. And and then I sprinkle in email coaching. So I also have different ways of accessing me besides sessions. So people send me their dream in an email and I do my magic and I send back all my thoughts and prompts for reflection and symbolism. And I'm really good at it, actually. People are amazed what they get back from me after they send me a dream. So,
Wow.
yeah. So, yeah, meandering. It's not linear. We follow the unconscious and what shows up in your life. And that's the material that we work with. And I also kick ass when I need to. So the coach in me is like, all right, girlfriend, pull out that phone. We're sending that text right now. You don't have to. You don't have, it's your choice. Yeah, okay, let's do it. So I have a way of also, because it's about integrating the insights into your life and doing things differently. Now you got to do things differently. And so I'm the pusher when I need to be the pusher. And I ask them to send me a text when they do it or send me a picture when they do something. And so I can be their accountability partner too. So my new program accelerates all that. So my new program is like a big 6-month deep dive and it's intense. So.
Okay. Awesome. That's so cool. Now, I want to transition a tad bit. We touched upon a little bit about writing down and the benefits of writing, but I read in your book about how you haven't journaled since 5th grade, and then you started journaling again at 48.
Yeah.
What made you start? Like, why?
It was a moment of surrender because I couldn't figure my life out. I couldn't. There were no more strategies, no more books to write, no more books to read. No, I was just like, I'm at a loss. So I journaled February 2013. I can't live like this anymore. And then I didn't even remember what I journaled. 6 months later, I went back and I read, maybe it was 6 months, I read my documentation of my husband's drinking. So we didn't know that he was an alcoholic. Like he didn't either. He thought he was just fine. And suddenly he was like a full blown out of control alcoholic. And I didn't see the pattern. So the journaling was like, okay, it's Monday. Monday feels good. It's going to be a good week. And it's the only day he doesn't drink. And then Tuesday he golfs and he has a couple of beers. No big deal. Comes home for dinner. By Wednesday, he's done this. And now I can tell his energy has shifted. By Friday, when we're supposed to have happy hour, he already had a martini. And so he's not even really like present with me. Saturday, he's hungover. So we get in an argument about planning the day, blah, blah, blah. But I was an eternal optimist. So I just didn't see and I didn't know enough about addiction to know that it wasn't going to change. Right. And so that's why I started journaling. So journaling allowed me to just document stuff. And then I could see a pattern. And once I could see the pattern, then I could talk about it. I didn't really know how to talk about it. And then the next thing journaling did was I read a book by Iyanla Van Zandt called In the Meantime. And one of the questions she suggests you reflect about is what you learned about love as a child. So I was like, I don't know. So I journaled about that for a while. And I realized that love for me was conditional upon my behavior. So I felt loved when I had good behavior. But when my behavior wasn't perfect, I was undermined by my mother. So then I had to explore my mother wound. So so I've been journaling since then. My journal is now, my Word document is 2,000 pages.
Wow. Do you journal every day?
No, I journal in the morning and I try to journal every day, but I don't always. And my journaling takes different forms. So sometimes I don't know, I just sort of like journal when I feel like I need to journal, but then also if I get away from it, I go back to journaling like, oh, here's what I'm grateful for every day. Here's my vision. So I also use it for like manifesting, attracting things to me that I desire. Sometimes anytime I have a dream, I journal about that. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll go, oh, wow, I had a dream about water or a toilet. That hasn't shown up for a while. So I may search my document for all the dreams where I went to the bathroom. And then I'll, find some meaning in that. So actually typing into a journal is great because then, I suspect now you could even use AI to go into it and pull out themes because while you're journaling, sometimes you don't find the meaning until later on. And then you realize like, oh, wow, I had this series of dreams where my ex-husband showed up and here's in hindsight, what that was about. It was preparing me for, I don't know, something that I had to do. So yeah, journaling, really important, but also a lot of people resist journaling because you don't know what's going to come up. And then it becomes real when you put it on the paper.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing it first. You're looking at it. It's different when you look at it.
But then you also can get it out of you. So you can get some distance from it and you can look at it like it's a movie, like it's not even you. So that's the benefit of journaling is yes, you're going to see it and it's real, but also you get some distance from it and you get it out of your body and you actually get relief from doing that.
Oh, absolutely. Being able to separate yourself from the situation, the experience, the thought, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So helpful. So helpful. But I think that's why people have the resistance is because it makes it more like it's reality than just in your imagination, even though it's not really imagination, because if you're thinking it's affecting everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. Oh my gosh.
Great.
I could talk to you all day.
I know, right?
We'll
have to do it again. We could go deeper into another topic next time.
Yes, I would love that. So I have a question. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Jay Shetty. I don't think so.
He's got a podcast, motivational speaker. He's an author, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments. And I started incorporating these into my podcast. So the first one is called The Men Sides to Us, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Okay.
So number 1, what is 1 word someone who is meeting you for the first time would describe you as?
That someone else would describe me as?
Someone meeting you for the first time.
How they would describe me?
Yep.
Interesting.
Okay. Number 2, what is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Oh, 1 word. Deep.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
That's a good one. I don't know. God, I have such a blank right now. Well, maybe we'll curious. Yeah.
Number 4, what is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you?
There are many of those people. I'm trying to think of a word that they would use. Maybe, I don't know. If they didn't like me, detached, maybe? I don't know.
Number 5, what is 1 word that you're embodying right now?
Fun.
Okay. Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence. Number 1, what is the best advice you've heard or received?
Best advice. I'm going to go with my man, Carl Jung. And I don't know if you take this as advice, but this is the one thing that he said that really sticks with me. And it's the fate of humanity depends upon the self-reflecting individual. And so my own self-reflections are contributing to what wants to be unleashed from the collective unconscious. So it's really valuing my unique experience as a human being.
Okay. Number 2, what is the worst advice you've heard or received?
I don't know. My brain doesn't really work on negatives like that. I don't know. What comes up for me is when some interviewers want to say, if you could go back and do something different, what would you do? And that's not really advice, but it's a way to think about how would I have lived my, life differently? And I don't think you should ever ask yourself that question because you needed all of the experiences you had in order to learn, our dharma. Our dharma is we have a life lesson that our life represents a question that we're answering. So I guess that would be like, no, I don't agree with that approach at all.
Okay. No, I like that. I really agree with that. I think that even the bad, if you want to call it quote unquote bad, which I don't think really anything is bad, but even the lesser things that happen in our lives, I feel like there's a greater purpose for all of it, whether it's teaching us something, whether it's
Yeah.
showing us something, helping us grow in some area, helping us release some feeling about something. Like there's always some
Yeah.
deeper meaning, and you might not see it right away. It might even be years down the line, but I think there's always meaning.
Yeah. I mean, if something really bad happened in my life, I could say, oh, maybe I should have walked down that street instead of this street. And then maybe somebody wouldn't have gotten a car accident. But then then that has to do with guilt for you being responsible for something that happened in life. And that's not your burden. So even there, it's like, yeah, that's what you're saying. So
Yeah. Guilt is a tough one. That is a tough one.
yeah.
Number 3, what is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
I guess achievement. So I have changed my relationship with achievement. To achieve like implies there's some sort of reward or outcome. So I prefer to replace it with like pursuit of excellence, right? Pursuit of excellence doesn't have like an end game. It's just this pursuit of excellence, right? To be excellent at something that you're passionate about. So that's different than achievement. Achievement is sort of like you achieve. What do you achieve, right? It's like you achieve to receive something, recognition or a feeling of worthiness. So the pursuit of excellence is different. So,
Okay. Number 4, if you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
that I was a cheerleader for people, and that because of me, they became more curious about their unique experience as a human being.
Okay. Number 5, if you could create one law in the world, that would it be? And I want to know why.
I missed the question. You cut out a little bit. If I could create one law, that's how far I heard you.
In the world everyone had to follow, what would it be and
I
why?
still couldn't hear you. This is totally a Hermes thing. Hermes is not letting me hear what you're asking.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be and why?
Oh, I don't like that. because we're like, everybody's playing their role, right? Even the people who are the agitators, right? It's just, this is consciousness expansion is like a really messy, chaotic thing. I mean, it would be nice to say, people, I guess I would say, like, you have to find something good about yourself and express that. Because it's self-love that then manifests as, love for others. So it would be to find a way to find something that you love about yourself. So everybody has to find something they love about themselves.
I love that. Okay. And okay. Now, those are all the Jay Shetty questions. But now I have one more personal question from me for you. So, if you had the attention of the entire world for 5 minutes, what would you say?
I don't know. I think I would say, well, I guess I would say Carl Jung says the fate of humanity depends upon the self-reflecting individual. So, and that everyone is playing their role in order for consciousness to expand and to maybe become more conscious of our role that we're playing. I don't know. That's a hard one. That's a hard one for me off the top of my head.
And no, I get it.
Yeah.
I think that's great, though. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. And this was so much fun. I'd love to have you on the podcast again sometime and delve a little deeper into it. But before we close out, where can the listeners connect with you?
Okay. If they go to debralukovich.com, everything is there about me. So at the very top are all my different platforms. So they can get to Dose of Depth podcast. They can search for that too and listen to it on all the various podcast platforms. And I have a blog. I write a lot of articles, and there's a services page. I do have a memoir coming out soon. So I'm always looking for people to subscribe so I can let them know what's going on. And yeah, they can find everything about me there. And I do, if anybody is interested in depth psychology coaching, I offer a free exploratory chat. So we can work one of your dreams if you want, and you can see if you like depth psychology. And yeah, so DeborahLukovich.com, they can find everything there.
Okay, awesome. And now, are there any final words that you want to share with the listeners?
No, I don't think so. You were super comprehensive. It was great. I loved it. I mean, like you said, we can go various places for hours and hours. So yeah.
We could.
No,
I could talk to you all day.
I know. It was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everybody.
And thank you guys for tuning in to an episode of Amanda's Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.